We are good.
All right, all set. So welcome to the October 21st, 2021 meeting of the CB6 Public Safety Committee. I'm Matt Roberts, the chair of Public Safety Committee, and this meeting is called to order at 6:33 p.m. Tonight, we are joined by Assistant District Manager Brendan Burth and CB6 Public Safety Committee Vice Chair Designate Seema Shah. Members of the public, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. If there is time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. And Steve O has volunteered to take minutes tonight. Thank you, Steve. So we will now turn to attendance, and will be taken by roll call. Brendan will conduct the roll call.
Committee members, I will call your name and you will unmute yourselves. When your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. Andrew Gross. Okay, Andrew, I don't see him here. Matt Roberts.
Present.
Seema Shah.
Present.
Sean Sherman.
Present.
Okay, Susan is not here. Steve O.
Present.
Stu Desser.
Present.
And Eric Goldberg.
Present.
We have a quorum.
All right, terrific. Thank you, Brendan. So now we will turn to the agenda. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and appears on the screen before you. Committee members, if there's no objection, we will adopt the agenda as stated. So members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, you may raise your hand through Zoom. All right, seeing that there are no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. Committee members, the minutes from the May 20th, 2021 committee meeting were distributed ahead of time by the board office. If there's no objection, we will adopt these meetings as drafted. If you object to adopting these minutes, you may raise your hand through Zoom. And seeing no objections, the minutes from the May 20th, 2021 meeting are adopted and will be available on the CB6 website tomorrow. So let's talk about ground rules. Committee members, this should sound very familiar. No one may speak until granted the floor. If you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. And as a reminder, the chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. That should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you're having or to state in writing information such as an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. When a committee member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you and you can unmute yourself so you can speak. And as a reminder, we're required by New York State law to create a verbatim transcript of this meeting. So please keep your questions and comments succinct and germane to the discussion. And that brings us to the agenda. So tonight we'll be talking about, Brendan, do we have the agenda to put on the screen? I know it's distributed ahead of time. In any case, so item number one, we will talk about a city council bill, which was proposed by Councilmember Kalos, who also represents a portion of this district, dealing with vehicular noise. So I know we've gotten some complaints over the summer about that. Some of the committee members have expressed concern about that as well. So we'll get into that. What would that bill do? What wouldn't it do? We'll get into that. Agenda item number two, we'll hear from the Department of Environmental Protection. Obviously, most of you remember about 7 weeks ago, we had a serious flooding incident across the city due to heavy rainfall. We'll get into some particulars about that. And then lastly, we put on the agenda to if there's any concerns about enforcement of proof of vaccination requirements in establishments throughout the district. I know there were a couple of incidents elsewhere in the city, but I don't believe there's too many issues here in District 6. So we'll get into that. Just a note, I have another commitment, so I have to jump off at 7:30. So Seema is going to take you the rest of the way, depending on where we're at that point. So let's get started. Agenda item number 1. So I believe we have a representative. We have Adam Bermudez from Councilmember Kalos's office joining us and so thank you, Adam, for joining us. And so really, I guess we want to get started here. Brendan, if you can put up the text of the bill. So Adam, I don't know if you want to give us a quick intro as to what this bill was designed to do.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think everyone around the city, whether it's in a very highly dense residential area where there's folks, 20 stories up who can hear the noise, or whether it's in a more low density area in outer boroughs, has been pretty concerned about noise issues throughout their community, both on residential blocks and on major commercial blocks. And I think it's a little different in different areas of the city. In some areas, it's ATVs and motorcycles and those sort of vehicles are a big problem. In other areas, it's all sorts of vehicles. And like I said, I've heard from folks who are 25 stories up who have noise complaints. So it's not just the folks on lower floors, and I appreciate that. So you guys can take a look at the bill. I mean, we're looking to do sort of a pilot program. So this is the kind of thing that I think there's going to be a lot of room for sort of community input. And while this is the bill that you guys are seeing now, I think there's sort of a potential for it, kind of the kinks to be, for kinks to be worked out for, because like I said, it is a pilot program utilizing sort of relatively new technology that is very much available, but I feel like, it's not everywhere yet. It's going to be everywhere. There's places in Europe and California that utilize this technology. So I will call the technology a noise camera, and there's other ways of describing the device. But I think the best way of describing it is that, I mean, we're all familiar with cameras that are able to take a picture if a vehicle is speeding. So that's essentially the idea, that this device is going to be able to snap a picture of the vehicle and presumably, the license plate, identifying, who was the violator of making too much noise. The technology definitely exists. I mean, I think one example of sort of noise technology utilized throughout the city right now is there's some precincts that use the shot spotter technology that's able to sort of, again, pinpoint, here's sound, and in that case, it's gunshots, here's sound, and able to sort of identify where that sound is coming. This is much more direct, sort of like speed cameras, that the camera would identify, would be relatively close to where the vehicle is, and the technology is able to pick up that the sound is above a certain decibel level, would take a picture, and and again, and the bill sort of goes through the process by which enforcement would be able, you have that picture, and just like in the case of a speed camera, sort of a process that goes by, that there would be violations. I think the highest violation is as high as about $1,500, but that's the kind of thing that I can see sort of being worked out in in the future as different communities are sort of engaging on this bill, and there's different input. But yeah, I mean, some kind of enforcement mechanism where there is a definitive penalty, just like in the case of speeding. I think a lot of communities are very open to this idea. So, like I said, pilot program. I'm open to hearing some comments. I can answer some questions. I think you guys get a general sense of it, and like I said, I can answer questions. I'm more interested in sort of getting feedback from you guys, to see how we can present this to other communities. See if we can make the bill a little better. I mean, you guys understand the unique time frame. We have a new administration coming in. You have a change of the guard with a lot of political forces. So there's lots of folks that are interested in this, and I don't, this isn't something that's going to get passed tomorrow, but obviously there's a lot of interest, and especially in the coming year, it's something that we see there's going to be interest. It's going to move. So open to hearing from you guys.
All right, thanks, Adam, for the good intro. So we'll open it up to the committee. I have some questions, but I want to hear from the committee members as well. So I think we'll start with Eric, and then we'll go to Steve. Eric, you have the
Great. Yeah, thanks, Matt and Adam as well. Just two quick questions. First is this something that can be handled at a city level? Just my recollection with speed cameras is that there's a big interplay between state and city, yep, and difficult to manage it at the city level.
Yeah, so my understanding is we at the city level can definitely institute and fund this pilot program. I will say that there is moves at the state level. Senator Gunardes out in, I believe, Brooklyn, he has a similar bill, the same idea. And so as far as the specifics of, a pilot program versus sort of instituting something that's going to be, kind of established for the long term, I think that, this is the kind of thing that if in the next 2 years, some sort of city run and funded pilot program, it could potentially sort of help at the state level to institute something maybe on a larger scale. So it's definitely the kind of thing that, there's definitely state issues here. But like I said, my understanding is that this bill, we can do it at the city level. But, there's working, two issues here.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was just curious because I know that that's been an issue with extending the number of speed cameras. So it was just a call out. The second is, did you give thought to looking at this through an equity lens in terms of modifying behavior versus fines? Just when you just set up to $1,500 for a fine, that kind of took me aback in terms of the severity of those fines. And, unfortunately, I haven't looked through all the details, but, the goal would be to modify and change behavior rather than sort of punitive, punitive fines that, as a percentage, someone could pay that fine easily. Someone else, they could wind up in debt for the rest of their life.
I think that's a great point. And I think, kind of like the minutia of what kind of fines is exactly the kind of thing that a lot of community input and hearing from that kind of message from a CB6, I think that's gonna go a long way into figuring out something that sort of, that could pass and be a program that citywide, would be palatable. So I think that's some great information. I'll bring back to the councilman.
And I'll just, the last point is, it sounds great. The noise is annoying, and it shouldn't be there. So any solutions to help work on that are, at least from my perspective, encouraged. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Eric. Let's go to Steve.
Thanks for your time. I have 2 questions. Make them quick. I think it makes a lot of sense, this type of technology, being that we have a bridge and a tunnel. A lot of back and forth noise that we hear from people coming in and off both of those major infrastructures. My question is, first one is, some noises are necessary, like the police sirens, fire trucks, the ambulances. Is there a mechanism in place to address good noise versus bad noise versus, say, someone who modified their car with those crazy mufflers, or noise violators versus good noise like emergency vehicles?
I think that's a great point. We've definitely especially in the East 90s, like I've heard from constituents that, their concerns are ambulances and definitely, right. I mean, when we've spoke to the hospitals and the folks involved with ambulances, it is what it is. It's a high decibel level. And so I appreciate what you're saying. I think that one of the things, having a program like this where, like speed cameras, you're targeting specific vehicles. I mean, you can weed out emergency vehicles this way. So I mean, seeing what kind of vehicle, that's I think one good way to identify where there's a problem and where there isn't a problem.
But is there a mechanism, or that hasn't been explored yet?
Say that again?
Is there a mechanism, or has that not been explored yet?
So a
'Cause you could
specific
potentially see
mechanism
that.
where, in other words, my understanding is it's sort of like based on decibel. But again, if you like take picture of some high decibel, like like an ambulance, in other words, it is what it is. So I mean, this would be a program that would presumably, like, the ambulance is not going to get a ticket, whereas the ATV or the dirt bike, like I think Mr. Collins was saying, would. I mean, because someone would, I guess, be reviewing. If you look through the enforcement, presumably, if you're taking a photo, at some point there's a, in the mechanism of there's a violator. But I think that this, again, this is definitely the kind of thing I think we're going to get a lot of input. And as far as, who is the violator, what is the appropriate amount of a penalty, that kind of thing. And at some point, as Eric mentioned earlier, like state law could be involved in this. But we have, my understanding is sort of like the program that we have laid out. It's legal. The city can do it, and that's where I'm trying to get some input from you folks. I think you're right about there's some noise that it's going to exist, and so how do we find those bad actors, which are especially certain kinds of vehicles, So this is one way to identify them.
My other question is, this is a pilot program, and like I said, for our community district, excuse me, it makes a lot of sense near, like, my question is, where is it going to be placed? It makes sense that since we have a bridge and a tunnel, that people along the way do make a lot of noise, who approach or leave those places. We also have hospital districts in our areas, which we want to be to address those noise challenges, and a number of other scenarios like schools and such. How are you? What's a profile of the type of places that you have in mind for this program, for this pilot? Like, it's not going to be everywhere in the district. It's going to be in key places, right? So how are you guys determining that?
Well, one thing I'll say is that, I know that they're going to, sort of want community input. Here's community input. When we sort of go farther along the process, I know this is going to sort of come back to community boards. I mean, one thing I'll say is that, a lot of the Upper East Side is very, and CB6 specifically, and sort of is block by block. So I appreciate that if you're on First Avenue, where you don't really have residential, let's say you have hospitals, right, that's a different location than over on Second or Third, let's say, that's, on more of a residential block. So I get that. And as far as a pilot, I don't, it's not going to be on every block. I can't identify right now and sort of say exactly where, but you're definitely right that I think that the idea is that this is to target in a problem that is a residential problem. And I think that that's the difference between Brooklyn and Manhattan, where residential is very close to non-residential in Manhattan, whereas in some other communities, in other words, it's a little more, it's a little more spread out, let's say. So I definitely think that, identifying sort of particular target spots is going to be helpful along the process. Because what I see is that, ultimately, there's only going to be so many cameras that could be procured to be able to do this, right? So, different community, everyone's going to want this, right? So different communities throughout the city are going to want this. And I appreciate that in like a denser community, let's say there's more of a need than a community that's where it's less dense, but there's still going to be a desire for it. And I think that that's sort of the political process of like how big could a program like this be? In other words, are you procuring hundreds or are you procuring thousands of cameras to be able to, and I think that, when you look at the speed camera program, which, over time, here you had new technology, you had a lot of interest, and then it was, how over time do we sort of roll this out in different communities, and you had both the state and the city, so that's, I'm laying it all out there. I don't have the answers, but that's sort of where, I could definitely see, particularly kind of, high density Manhattan communities being able to have a strong voice, that, we appreciate that the Brooklyn and Queens folks like this, but we also, in other words, we really have the need, that I can see it being the kind of thing that, because of in other words, that it could be the kind of thing that citywide, there is that interest. You know what I mean? Because everyone's going to want this, even though there's going to be a more need for high density, more cameras in Midtown versus, in an outer borough. So, I think community input is going to determine ultimately where the cameras are, initially.
Thank you for your time.
All right, fair enough. Let's go to Stuart up next. Stuart, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you. I have several questions too. I'll try to sort of combine them. First, has this been tested in any court, or has this been implemented and therefore tested in any court anywhere in the United States? And I'll just elaborate slightly on that. The city administrative code is pretty vague. It says that something should be plainly audible at a certain distance for it to be a violation. The state VTL goes into at least decibel levels at a certain distance. But, the technology, does this technology accommodate exactly what the state VTL specifies?
I'm not 100% sure. So I not sure.
So it hasn't been tested in any court so far in the US, as far as you know.
My understanding is that there has been in California, I could Google which municipality, but I know that we have, at least somewhere in California. But it's definitely relatively new technology, but, it's ready to go. It's tested,
Okay, and the intro says that there will be signs telling you that there's a noise detecting device coming up. What's the purpose of notifying people?
I think that's it's a good question. I get, it's I think with a new program, if people don't, I appreciate your what you're getting at here, that people are maybe gonna be less loud if they know the signs are around. If you think that's a bad idea, if you guys do, that's the kind of thing I could bring back and say, people don't like it, but I think that, that's the kind of thing that I think with speed cameras, I've seen the signs, right? So I think this is one of those things, open a suggestion. So if I can bring back to someone like the folks at CB6 think that that's a bad idea,
Well, I think that's a question. I'd like to know why. It may make sense, but I'd like to know why you choose to do it that way. The law also, as I understand it, is only for violations of the motor, the engine of a vehicle making too much noise. So if somebody has their music blasting out of their car, will this detect that? And is that a violation as well?
Like you said, I don't see specific language for music, and I guess that's one of those things that I'm not. I really feel like the motor reaches a much higher decibel level, as annoying as music can be, right? So that's all I could say. Like you said, it doesn't specifically say that it can do noise at any, music noise at a specific level. So.
Oh, okay. I'm asking because I'm thinking of the ways that this could be challenged. And there seem to be quite a lot of different ways, but I don't object to the technology. One last question. I was unclear as to how some of this data could be shared. It would only be shared if there were a warrant of some sort for that names that particular license plate. Is that my correct understanding?
I mean, when I was looking this over, yeah, I mean, as far as, law enforcement, I mean, I appreciate that, I think with any new technology, if you're talking about taking photographs, there's going to be people that are very skeptical that, this data could be hacked, could get into the wrong hands. And I think that that's why, they wanted to kind of keep it relatively limited. This is another thing that I can see being, kind of worked out over time with community input. So yeah, I mean, there's only so much, you can do with it, right? I mean, what are your thoughts on, yeah.
Okay, I'll leave my questions at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Let's go to Seema up next. Seema, you have the floor.
Hi, thanks for being here. I just had a background question. What level of analysis has been done, if any, around vehicular noise being the primary source of noise in CB6, as opposed to, noise from bars and restaurants and clubs and, other kind of street activity?
I mean, if that's for me, I mean, I think they're very unique, right? I just know that this is an issue that throughout the community and diverse communities, vehicular noise, is an issue. And we hear it throughout the Upper East Side from the East 50s to up in the East 90s. But you're definitely right that, if you're in a high density place like the East 50s or East 60s, I mean, there's lots of other noises too. I don't really know what, I mean, I don't.
Okay, so no analysis.
Analysis, is this the primary concern of like folks who live in CB6? I think it's just, I think this, Council Member Kalos has definitely heard a lot of constituents throughout his district with this concern. And so that's why he wanted to legislate. I don't know about saying I think on some people's particular block, if you had a loud bar, maybe that's on your particular block, your big concern. So I don't know what you mean by analysis.
All right, great, thanks.
So that's the committee question. So I have a couple of questions and thoughts here. So I think a big piece of the problem in this district is centered around illegal ATVs and vehicles that should not be on the road in the first place. So as I understand it from the text of this intro, this bill might help in issuing fines, but it's not actually going to do anything to get these vehicles off the road. Am I correct in asserting that?
That sounds like in other words, as far as, how much power does the city have? And yeah, I mean, there's a limit when you say get it off the road, we're just talking about given violations that hopefully is gonna, influence a person to do the right thing.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I think a lot of these vehicles, which are mainly a lot of the ones that are illegal, don't have license plates, don't have, any mechanism that you would be able to track the actual owner of the vehicle. So I think that might be an issue around this technology.
Yeah, I think there's law enforcement issues in any law enforcement circumstances. How do you track a violator? Whether it's an individual or car with an individual. So
yeah, and I think if I'm hearing you correctly, and if I'm reading everything in here, it seems like if you have say a dozen illegal ATVs racing up the street, how would you be able to prove, that an individual vehicle is the culprit there? I mean, collectively, there's a lot of noise, and you could argue and try to make a case that all of the vehicles are committing a violation. I just don't know that. To me, that seems like an uphill battle legally.
I think that makes perfect sense. I think that also, I mean, in other words, and so, as far as the technology, I think that if you had a bunch of cars racing down the street, presumably, a speed camera would maybe get them all. Maybe it might miss one depending, you know what I mean? In other words, I think that's, whereas the speed camera has been around for a while, this is the kind of technology that, maybe it gets, in other words, it's able to get all those photos, and maybe, you're right that it's the kind of thing that maybe it's not perfect, So I think that's a reasonable concern, but I think that, if there was, let's say, 5 vehicles and they were somewhat spaced, I mean, again, presumably you're taking the photo just like a speed camera in succession. So
All right, fair enough. So just to state for the record, so for those of you who are not familiar with the illegal ATVs and the illegal bikes, what the police department does currently is they track them through intelligence, and then when they get to a certain point, they cut them off and they seize them. So unfortunately, those operations require a lot of resources, which are not available on a daily basis. So there are several times when these vehicles can travel around the city freely. So would this technology help? Potentially, but there's no guarantees.
I think presumably one vehicle could hypothetically get like 10 violations in the course of an hour. And I know it's like, well, is that person going to pay those 10 violations? That, and I think that's the same thing as like, well, a person could speed and they could speed 10 times in an hour. And so they could get 10 to, so anytime you're trying to deal with law enforcement and, here's a violation, you get a fine, I appreciate the concerns. And I think that the more conversation, like Eric was saying, that in other words, for different people, a particular financial, is going to be a very different thing. So, I think that that's a reasonable concern also. In any time you're trying to, sort of influence behavior in some sort of financial, some sort of penalty. So.
All right, so let's go to all right, so committee members, let's hear some thoughts here as far as we have an opportunity to provide feedback here. Do we like the bill? Do we not like? Do we think it's worth trying? Do we think it's a risk? I think there's a lot of things that need to be improved here, but I don't know as far as a resolution goes, what kind of feedback the committee members would be open to. Stuart?
Well, I certainly like the concept, but it sounds like you're going to try this out with real people before you know if the technology is really sufficiently refined to pick out the right person. And it's a defense pretty much to say, well, it wasn't me. And I'm not clear that we know how this equipment is calibrated. I'm not clear that we know what is a proper legal defense. How many decibels at the distance that the camera is from the vehicle, as opposed to what the state law says. So I like the law. I mean, I like the concept of this intro, but I'd like to know that the technology is proven and it can withstand a reasonable challenge.
No, that's a good point. So Adam, I'm going to get to you in a minute, Steve, but Adam, hopefully, I think as far as next steps go, if you could circle back with us next month on some of these questions, and maybe give us a little bit more clarity on, the where it's been tested, how it's been tested. I think some of the technical aspects of it, I think conceptually it's favorable, but there's a lot of questions. So I'm going to go to Steve next and any other committee members that have any questions, but I don't think it's worth putting forth a resolution tonight. I think we should try to get some clarity on some of these things, and then we can circle back on this as well. Steve?
Thank you. A lot of good questions. You mentioned that this is a pilot program, and one of the things that helps measure success is there has to be some level of success criteria that measures if this is a successful program and exposes what has been accomplished or has not been accomplished. I've personally been kind of worked on the gunshot detection program in a different city that deployed something very similar, like you mentioned earlier. That itself was a very detailed pilot program in itself with a number of agencies. They had a success criteria and objectives. Seems like this is a great step because in the absence of it, we have nothing. But still, I think the questions that were asked today shows that we need to know what will help determine we've reached that threshold of success. That this has proven that, yeah, it has these faults, it needs these tweaks, but we know that this is a good baseline and we can work from here, and that the technology, the legal challenges has a roadmap that can be addressed. I think that's something that needs to be further explored.
Yeah, I think that's great. And what I'll just say, as far as like the legislative process and being, we've introduced the bill. So, I mean, with some ideas, it's, it's like, it's very clear, but like you said, with this, it's, you want to hear the input, you want to see the data, you want to see, examples that stuff has worked. And that's where, having a hearing where, in other words, the people producing the technology coming before the city, being able, in an open forum to answer questions. I know Mario's on this call, having DEP, who I know deals with noise enforcement, and giving their sort of like their experience. They're the noise experts. When we have noise stuff, we got to go to them, and so they're being able to have all that sort of aired out and community input. I think we're gonna get to a good place. But Stephen, it sounds like you went through this process where, with new technology, right? You need to have a lot of community conversations and and figure it out, talk it out. So.
All right, let's go to Eric. You're up next, Eric.
Sure, thanks. Just my reflections is that this clearly is an issue, noise in the community, in the neighborhood. My thoughts is that this is probably a small contributor. While it is a jarring one, it's probably a small piece of the puzzle. Probably investing a lot of time into something that's not really hitting the main issue of noise in the community. Pilot programs I'm in favor of because, hey, we should try some stuff out. But I feel like this is a small issue, overall. So just not sure in the long term if it's worth the investment.
All right. All right, thanks, Eric. All right, last question, then we have to move on, Stuart.
Just the other thing is, I'd like to know why the legislation anticipates putting signs up to let people know that they're about to enter this. There may be a logic to that, but I'm not sure I see it. So, if you can come back with that. Thanks.
Yep.
Sounds good. So if there's no further questions on this, I think for next steps, Adam, if you could come back to us next month or in December, once you have some answers to better inform the committee, and then we can kind of either support it or provide feedback to what extent, to what we would like to see before we support it. Sound good?
I'm good.
All right,
Adam,
thanks, Adam.
Adam, just one quick thing before you leave. Just wanted to flag for you the question from Deborah Baldwin in the Q&A asking about honking. So I just wanted to flag that since the CD6 office gets some constituent complaints about honking.
Yep. I mean, look, my understanding is if the honking is coming from a relatively standard horn, that it's not gonna pick that up. So, but a good question.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, honking is permitted in incidents where there's imminent danger. So you would have to specify, you'd have to be able to prove that there was no imminent danger in order to enforce a honking violation, which becomes rather tricky, especially when dealing with cameras and not actual people who are observing the violation. So thank you again, Adam, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, folks.
Appreciate it. All right, so now we're going to turn to agenda item number 2, totally switching gears here. But coincidentally, we have the Department of Environmental Protection here to talk about flooding. And of course, they also deal with noise and stuff like that. But we're here to talk about flooding, flooding from rain. I know we've had some presentations in the past on storm surge related flooding. Talk about rain flooding during the Ida storm in September. You know, how do we keep everybody safe in the future? So I believe we have Mario Bruno from the Department of Environmental Protection. We also have Umberto. So gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here tonight. I'm just going to try and share my screen here. Oh, let's see if you can see that.
That's good.
So can you see the DEP page?
Yes, we see it.
Oh, thank you. So speaking about storms, so yeah, we're talking, that's right. Thank you for clarifying. DEP is the agency that handles, we deal with stormwater flooding. Sea level rise and tidal impacts are really under the mayor's office, and also like federal agencies like Army Corps of Engineers gets involved, and some of the projects that they're now working on, like the East Coast Resiliency Project, that's the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project, that's being done with the mayor's office and DDC, and DP does have some involved with that, but that we're not the lead agency. So we're the lead agency on rainfall, precipitation, and stormwater flooding. Ida dumped about, it was a tremendous amount of rain. It was an environmental disaster for us. The rain fell at a rate of over 3 inches per hour. Our oldest sewers can handle about 1 inch per hour, and sewers that follow modern standards, and those are sewers we probably installed in the last 5 years around the city, can handle about 1.75 inches per hour. So basically, you had a rate of rain that in most places was probably 2 to 3 times more than what the sewers can handle. And in those circumstances, you know, there's no way to prevent that kind of flooding. You know, the best steps are to seek high ground, and you know, and use, you know, and report some of the worst case examples to, you know, to 911 or to 311. But you know, we've seen not just an increased amount of precipitation, but an increase in the frequency of very intense storms that they're short, but they put down a lot of rain, and they're causing a lot of local flooding all over the city. In terms of flood prevention, especially where it concerns, you know, Manhattan, the biggest problem, and it's everywhere in the city, but Manhattan is it's a more congested area. It has the same problems with litter that other parts of the city have, and really it's, you know, in storms where there are instances where flooding happens when it really didn't, but because trash covers the top of the catch basin. Even a catch basin's filled with trash, but they actually have a hood inside up against the chute or the connection to the sewer. So catch basins are deep. The connection to the basin box is in the middle, so that when the storm water rushes in, the heavy stuff that it washes up falls to the bottom of the basin. The lighter stuff that floats, as the catch basin fills, the floatables sit at the top level of the water, but the hood over the catch basin chute prevents the trash from clogging it completely. It doesn't mean flow won't slow down, but it means flow still happens. But it's very easy for street trash to be swept onto the grading. As you can see here, this is an example of leaves, and cover it, and then basically no water goes in, and the street gets flooded. So the best way to prevent that is to, if you see trash, pick it up. Talk to your business owners about, being, fastidious about cleaning up cleaning out in the curb like they're supposed to. If you see a basin that's clogged, call in the 311, or even better, use the app or the website. And the other thing you can do if it's not too flooded to, wade out to it, is just, if you have an umbrella tip or an upside down broom handle, just poke out a few of the grading holes, and it'll actually relieve a lot of flow and maybe to a point where the corner of the street is passable. The other issue that causes flooding is surcharge. And surcharge is what happened on a big scale in Ida. So what that means is that in Manhattan, like most areas of the city, you have combined sewers. So a normal dry weather flow, as we say. So that sewer is one big sewer. It's big enough to handle stormwater, at least to normal standards. So because of that, it's usually handling sanitary flow, which you could see that it's shown in orange here. But when it rains, stormwater is entering the same pipe. They're mixing together. If there is no surcharge, that flow will go to the sewage treatment plants. But if there isn't, there are structures throughout the city near the coastline called regulators, and that's basically a box. It's a passive device, and if the sewer is surcharging, there's a little wall in that box called a weir. It's like a dam, and if the flow stays below it, the flow goes to the plant. If the flow goes above it, the flow goes to the outfall. Now, when that box is full and can't even, if the flow is so much that even the outfall can't empty the box fast enough, then you get surcharge, and so the water that is falling is building up on the streets, and in some cases, higher elevations flood lower elevations, and you have water coming out of sewers. So again, that's a hard thing to prevent, but those are usually the most extreme cases. Sewer backups are another hazard. So sewer backups can happen in any building, apartment buildings. You don't want raw sewage backing up into a mixture of stormwater and raw sewage backing up into the building. So you should work with your landlord and your super to remind them that they should be regularly cleaning the service line, the service lines, the water and sewer service lines, and sewer service lines from every building are responsible to the property owner. So the property owner should be cleaning out the sewer service line, making sure it's not full of muck or sludge, making sure it's not getting clogged with anything people might flush down the toilet. And also, depending on what part of Manhattan you live in, or if there's a lot of street trees, tree roots can also incur inside there, and that's when they call someone like Roto-Rooter, which cuts the roots out. You can see here that we have a homeowner's guide on this page to rain event preparedness. It's more about single family homes, but there's a lot of good points in there. We work with sanitation to make sure that they're looking at these locations, but we really do depend on residents and homeowners to try and be wary of trash and try to keep it out of the streets. I think that's just about as much as I can tell you about flooding, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Some very detailed information there. So, committee members, do you have any questions? Stuart.
Yeah, just two. What's the long-term solution to this? And also, I noticed that a number of times concrete trucks tend to wash some of their excess down into the sewer. Is that a major issue?
It's not a major issue, but it can be a major problem where it happens locally. We have an industrial waste inspection unit They work for the Bureau of Wastewater Treatment, which operates the plants and the pump stations. And that's a violation. So if you see that happening, you can get to that. You can find that violation using the 301 app or the website, and we'd like you to report it in. It's not a major concern, but we don't want to see it happen. You know, the biggest thing we worry about is really stuff covering the catch basin grading.
Okay, so the long-term solution to all of this?
The long-term solution is, you know, the DP has a 10-year plan. DP follows like a 10-year plan that we update every year to continue to build construction. The water and sewer rates, a large part of the money you may pay in water and sewer bills goes to funding the capital program. We issue our own bonds, and we have our own authority that issues bonds for our capital projects. So about half of that money is going to water and sewer projects that are built for us by DDC in conjunction with DOT funding for the roadway and street hardware and things like that, new street lights and curbs. And then the other half of our capital budget is to making our infrastructure more resilient. One of the things that we started doing since Sandy is we have a lot of low-lying areas where we operate heavy-duty pump stations. Some pump stations are there because because they're picking up flow that's dropping to a point that's below the interceptors in the sewer system, which are the final path to the sewage treatment plant. In Manhattan, you have a massive pump station on the Lower East Side that pumps a large portion of Manhattan's sewage to the plant in Greenpoint, and so what we're trying to do is make those pumps, the below ground pump stations, more resilient. The older pump stations did not have submersible pumps which can operate underwater because they're usually dry, and they're operating a sump that's dry and where the water level is flowing under them. So we have a lot of big projects where we're replacing them. One of the big ones is there's a pump station at the bottom. It's a stormwater pump station at the bottom of the lowest point of the Prospect Expressway. And that's been a massive multi-year project, but it'll prevent flooding there. But it's a tough question, and we don't have a plan to address that. What we're looking at is, do we adopt, do we change the standard of how we're building sewers? Do we increase the frequency of replacing sewers? And look at other ways to prevent stormwater from, when it falls at those kind of levels, from flooding homes. So there's a lot of things in a toolbox in terms of a long-term solution, but one we do know is that the more we build out sewers where there aren't any, the more that we replace old sewers with bigger sewers, and also green infrastructure where we can. We're building, we've built about over 10,000 small green infrastructure elements called rain gardens, and basically that's just an opportunity to capture stormwater and force it to infiltrate back into the ground underneath the hard pavement. The immediate goal of that has always been to reduce combined sewer overflows, because you're lessening the amount of stormwater going into the storm system, and therefore lessening the incidence of combined sewer overflows. But that also helps bring relief in terms of flooding in areas at Manhattan. Unfortunately, in Manhattan, because of there's very dense underground infrastructure in the city, and there's also there's a lot of poor geotechnical properties in areas. So rain gardens are not a good candidate there or on Staten Island because of the clay and the soil Staten Island. So those have been focused. But where we do green infrastructure everywhere is we fund green roofs, And that's something that can change. We can fund more green roofs. We fund green roofs on both public and private property because a big piece of this is the stormwater rule. In 2012, we changed the stormwater rule. So any large development, a new building, you know, a shopping center, a school with a campus, anything that's new, what we did is we increased we increased the amount of water that those facilities would have to detain during a storm by a factor of 10. So so what that means is that they have to employ, depending on the kind of facility it is, they have to employ deep roofs, which basically act as sort of open detention tanks, deeper roofs, you know, stronger roofs and deeper parapets, green roofs, which are really effective at detaining stormwater, detention tanks in places where there's open areas like parking lots. You're seeing more and more green infrastructure like swales, which are like our bioswales, which absorb stormwater before it's a lot of the stormwater before it's sent to the storm sewer. And now we're working on, the council passed a bill to allow us to update the stormwater rule. And very soon we're going to be releasing a draft of all the details, like in most bills, are in the rules that the agency develops with the law department. So we'll be releasing draft rules on the revised stormwater, draft rules for the revised stormwater rule very soon, probably in November or December of this year. And that's a strategy which involves the private sector and makes everything from it's going to make everything from single family homes to, you know, to large buildings have to handle more stormwater. The other thing I want to touch base on, which people always ask about, is when the city rezones and now they're building bigger buildings, or there's a BSA case where someone gets a variance to build a taller building, how does that impact the storm sewer system? Well, the way we make sure it doesn't is called the site connection process. So big buildings have to go through a site connection process and basically submit a set of engineering calculations to prove that all the measures they've adopted will prevent additional flow coming from that property and flooding the area locally. And in fact, when in the areas that have been rezoned for higher density, we revised the drainage plan, which is like the outline or sketch of the future sewer system. And that would require bigger sewers to be built before those buildings go up. And in many cases, we've already had major developers build new sewers for the city because they couldn't connect to the existing sewers that would because the drainage plan called for bigger sewers to allow that density. And we've had private developers build them for us because we can do that. And I think that's all part of an effective strategy. So I think looking at the stormwater rule, how can we revise that to create more resiliency? And also, you know, our long-term, you know, capital plan, how can we change that to reduce flooding?
Well, thank you. I'm glad we're keeping you busy. There's no action item that for the community board right now, right? You're just giving us information.
That's right. You know, we're waiting to see. Obviously, we're hoping that there's going to be some federal money coming out of this budget to help us advance projects. And what happens during the budget process, probably more likely next year, you know, the community board budget process, is that there will be like as some of you know, especially the district managers, you know, each community board gets an outline of the capital 10-year plan from, you know, infrastructure agencies like DEP, and they have a chance to review that and comment on that. So that's part of the process where, you know, you'll be able to tell us what you think of what we're planning for your community board.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mario. This is Seema. Nice to meet you. I'm the vice chair for public safety. Appreciate you coming in. with your colleague, just to pick up on Stuart's point, if there's anything you want us to put in our community board newsletter, which goes out to our community constituents, we're happy to include it. So, you can touch base with Brendan if there's anything like that, any of that content. It doesn't sound like it right now, but definitely wanted to offer it to you.
Sure, I think after the federal budget's passed, there'll be
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
news for the city.
yeah. Great, thank you. We can move on with our agenda. Everyone is welcome to stay. So the next item on our agenda, Brendan, if you don't mind, I think it's discussion about enforcement of proof of vaccination requirements in establishments in Manhattan, in our district specifically. And this was meant, Matt had just intended for this to be an open-ended discussion and an opportunity to voice any potential, challenges that people were seeing or having themselves in terms of like the enforcement of proof of vaccination. So let me just open the floor to see if there are any questions, comments, concerns to be raised. And I'm trying to.
I see Steve has his hand raised.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Stephen. Go for it.
I have a question about the awkward enforcement that happens with the local businesses in our area. They're the front lines of asking for the vaccination proof for a lot of the patrons out there, and some of them is reported on the news. Some of them are reported to the law enforcement. But a lot of them are just kind of a grin and bear it type of thing. Feel like we would like to support our local businesses, make sure they survive and succeed. But in addition to that, many of them stated that they're wearing multiple hats now, in addition to being the front lines of vaccine proof. I'm just wondering, what can we do to help our local businesses with this enforcement? It just seems like it's kind of left to them, and then with not many options other than to call the police, or it just seems like a lot for them.
Yeah, I know. I agree. I mean, just living and working in the district, I see that. So I know that it's a burden. I mean, I think it's meant to protect their staff and their themselves as restaurant owners, to make sure like their own kind of business longevity purposes, as it is to protect obviously the consumers and clients that come into their establishment. So it's it's tough, but it's something done to protect everyone. Are there any other, I don't see any other hands raised. So if anything, if you guys see anything, as the eyes and ears of the district, please let us know, please let the board know, and we can kind of socialize this again and later in November or December if needed. Just kind of keeping the agenda going. We're going to move on to old and new business. Would anyone like to raise anything? Would any of the committee members like to raise anything during this time? I see no hands. All right, Brendan, I'm not wrong, right? I don't see anyone kind of raising anything for old and new.
I don't see any hands from committee members, but I did see that Jim Collins, a CV6 member who's not on the committee, raised something that he wanted brought up under new business.
Okay, Jim, do you want the floor for a minute? Can we grant him the floor for a minute, please?
Sure, I can allow him to talk. Just a moment. You should be able to unmute yourself now, Jim.
And Jim, before you get started, I know you've
Uh-huh.
raised this a few times, so if you could just keep your points to what's fairly new and what you want this committee to do specifically, that'd be great.
Well, no, I only raised it once as a question to one of the assembly members. As you all saw, I guess it was 2 weeks ago now, that there was a woman killed in Times Square by a fleeing felon who had stolen another person's Apple iPhone, and he knocked her over and was killed. He was out on no bail for a prior sexual assault. And as a consequence, now this poor woman who was a nurse in the cancer wards in New Jersey is dead. This is one of a number of instances where we've seen people return who have been released with no bail and are out and preying again on innocent people. In the 2019-2020 session of the Assembly, Andrew Goodell, who's an assemblyman from Chautauqua County in Western New York, introduced a bill 11047 that would have restored judicial review of bail for defendants, and also followed that up with a regular review based on the severity of the crime. So if you're in jail for a misdemeanor, your bail is basically reviewed. I think it's like every week or every 2 weeks or something like that. If you're in for a more serious crime, then it goes to like a month. But in any event, there's regular review of the bail hearings. I think this is something that the Public Safety Committee would be well advised to consider and to suggest to our Assembly delegation and our State Senate delegation that they should pursue and consider, given how many serious crimes have resulted from the no bail policies that were adopted a couple of years ago.
And so is this back on the Senate floor?
At the moment, I don't believe so. I think it could be. I think Assemblyman Goodell would be happy to reintroduce it. I think there's any number of, I know that there is a considerable amount of public support for returning to judicial consideration of bail, judicial discretion on bail. I mean, right now we're just releasing people, no consideration as to whether or not they've appeared for prior appearances where they've been arrested. No consideration of the seriousness of the crime, no consideration of whether or not the person is dangerous or has a mental illness. I mean, the person who robbed this telephone apparently had a mental illness. Had he been given bail, he could have been evaluated, treated, and maybe stabilized. And before he's released,
Right.
Let's
not kind of go down that potential thought process, because what's happened has happened. But I can make sure that I mention this to Matt. I skipped the agenda item for the chair's report. I actually do have a chair's report from Matt, and this does actually kind of align with what he's thinking to do. So I have 3 points I just wanted to share with the committee. The first is actually focused on something else. For next month's meeting, we're going to have a presentation by the NYC Racial Justice Commission. And for those who may not be aware, Mayor de Blasio launched the Racial Justice Commission in March of 2021, I believe. And it's meant to kind of think about and look kind of very directly at institutional and systemic racism across the city, and specifically look at it from a charter revision perspective. So they will come present to us next month so we can learn more about what their work is. The second is that we're actually going to have a discussion, ideally with Brad Hoylman or someone on his team, on two parole bills, one that he's sponsoring and one that he is co-sponsoring, talking about parole reform. The first bill that he's directly sponsoring is focused on parole reform for those 55 and older who are incarcerated. And then the second that he's co-sponsoring is just focused on kind of, I believe in kind of reform around parole in general. And it has some aspects of it that, are kind of new to the parole space. So, we're ideally going to have Brad come and speak on one, if not both. And then the last thing, to go back to Jim's point, I think Matt has this vision around presenting a resolution about quality of life issues in our district in general, and something that he wants to position as like the district's perspective for the new administration specifically. And so I think that we can potentially think about weaving in, specific proposals or legislation, or even kind of think more broadly and creatively around, quality of life issues that we want at least looked at, if not addressed and solved. So that concludes my chair's report. Happy to take any questions on that. Just keep in mind that this would have been Matt's report, so I might not have a ton of additional details, but happy to answer any questions. Great, not seeing any questions on that. Do I have a motion to adjourn for tonight's meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Great. Does any committee member object to adjourning? All right, seeing no objections, we will adjourn tonight at 7:45. Thanks, everyone.